The heat was a living thing. It pressed down on the prairie, shimmered above the baked dirt, and clung to the 30 or so people gathered outside the Harlan ranch house. They stood stiffly, wilted by the sun, their Sunday clothes already dark with sweat under the arms. A preacher, his face slick and red from a book, his voice a dry drone that was quickly stolen by the wind. Lila stood beside Judge Royston Harlan, feeling the scratch of Belgian lace against her neck. The dress was worth more than her father's farm. It was an ivory cage, heavy with pearls and expectation, and she was suffocating in it. She kept her eyes fixed on a crack in the dry earth just beyond the preacher's boot. If she looked up, she would see her father, his face a mask of desperate relief, his debt finally paid. If she looked sideways, she would see the judge. She did not need to look to know he was there. He was a presence, a weight, a force that bent the world around him. He was 55, 28 years her senior, a man of immense physical bulk and even greater political power. He owned this land, the bank in the nearest town, and, after today, he would own her. She could smell the bay rum he used on his jowls and the faint, sour scent of whiskey on his breath, even here in the open air. His hand rested on the small of her back, a proprietary gesture that made her skin crawl. He had not touched her before this day, not really. He was a man who understood the appearance of propriety, but his eyes, when they had met hers during the few terse suppers at her father's table, had been filled with a chilling certainty. The preacher paused, clearing his throat. Marriage is an honorable estate, instituted of God in the time of man's innocency. Lila's mind drifted. Innocency. The word felt like a stone in her mouth. She thought of her father, a good man broken not by work, but by a single, crushing accident. A wagon tongue had snapped, pinning his leg. The debt to Judge Harlan for the seed in the new wagon had compounded, interest piling on interest until the sum was impossible. Then the judge had made his offer, not for the land, which was poor, but for the daughter. Her father had wept. He is a respected man. Lila, he had whispered, unable to meet her gaze. He will provide for you. He has given his word you will want for nothing. Lila had wanted to scream that she wanted for everything. She wanted the life she had imagined, a simple one with a man she might choose, a life of her own making. Instead, she was being sold to settle a marker, and therefore is not by any to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God. A small sound pulled Lila from her numb despair. It was a sniff, quickly stifled. She allowed her gaze to lift, scanning the small cluster of ranch hands and house servants standing off to the side, away from the proper guests. She found the source. It was a young woman named Clara, a girl hired only 2 months prior to work in the judge's kitchen. She was perhaps 16, with dull blonde hair and a perpetually frightened look. Today, that look was etched in new, terrible colors. Clara kept her head bowed, but not before Lila saw it. A dark, plum-colored bruise swelled from beneath the girl's hairline, covering her temple. Her lower lip was split, scabbed and raw. Lila remembered, 3 days ago, the judge complaining at supper. "The new girl is clumsy," he had said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "Dropped a full tray of crystal. She will need to be taught the cost of such carelessness." He had smiled at Lila then, a thin, wet smile. "I believe in discipline, my dear. A firm hand is the only way to ensure order." Clara had been dismissed the next morning, sent away without pay, and here she was, forced to stand and watch her replacement be sworn in. The girl's trembling was visible even from 30 feet away. She was not clumsy. She had displeased the judge. A cold, sharp terror, clearer than the prairie sun, cut through Lila's fog. This was not about debt. This was not about a respectable marriage. This was a sentence. The bruises on Clara's face were a map of Lila's own future. The locked doors, the discipline, the suffocating ownership. She looked at the judge's thick, ringed hand resting on her back, and for the first time, she truly understood what it was. It was a brand. The preacher turned to the judge. "Royston, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live?" The judge's voice was a rich, confident baritone. "I will." The sound of it, the absolute certainty, broke the last thread holding Lila in place. The preacher turned to her. His mouth opened. "Lila, wilt thou have this man?" She did not hear the rest. She was moving. It was not a decision, not a thought. It was an animal instinct, a bolt of lightning that shot through her limbs. She took one step back, then another. The judge's hand tightened, confused, but she was already twisting away from him. She heard a collective gasp from the crowd. She heard her father's voice cry out, "Lila!" A sound of pure anguish. She did not run toward the house or the road. She ran toward the open prairie, toward the endless, shimmering expanse of dry grass and rock. She ripped the lace veil from her hair and threw it to the ground. The heavy satin skirt of the dress tangled in her legs, and she gathered it up in fistfuls, her lungs burning. She had worn light satin slippers for the ceremony. They were gone in 10 strides, sucked off by the thick dust and clay. She ran barefoot. The dried stalks of buffalo grass were sharp as needles and small. Jagged stones cut the soles of her feet. She did not feel the pain. She felt only the terror. Behind her, she heard the judge's roar of outrage. "Get her, damn you! Get her back!" She heard the crash of boots behind her, the heavy pounding footfalls of men. 2 of them. She knew them. They were the judge's foremen. Rough men who did his bidding without question. She ran harder, adrenaline singing in her veins. She was small, but she was fast, raised on this land. She knew the dips and washes they did not. She angled toward a line of low, rocky ridges, praying she could find cover, a place to hide, a way to disappear. Her breath came in ragged sobs. The white dress was a beacon, a flag of surrender she could not shed. Blood from her feet left small, dark prints in the dust. But she did not look back. She just ran. Colt Mercer cursed, low and steady, as the wagon jack slipped again. The iron rim of the wheel was coated in grease, and the humidity of the coming storm made his grip slick. He was camped in the shadow of a long, rocky ridge, a place that offered shelter from the wind and, more importantly, was invisible from the main trail 4 miles south. He valued invisibility. He was a man who lived by a code of simplicity. 1 horse, 1 pack mule, a good rifle, and no attachments. Attachments got you killed, or worse, got you tied to a place you did not want to be. He was fixing this old wheel not for himself, but for a meager handful of dollars. A job for an old rancher 2 valleys over. He was good with his hands, good at fixing what was broken, so long as it was wood or metal. People, he had learned, were a different matter. They stayed broken. He wiped his hands on an oily rag and stood up, stretching the kinks from his back. He was tall, broad in the shoulder, and moved with a quiet economy. His face was weathered, browned by the sun, and bracketed by dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes, a pale, flat gray, were constantly scanning, a habit learned in the war and never unlearned. That was when he saw her. She was a flash of white against the brown earth, a dove fleeing a hawk. She was running hard, running broken, her movements jerky with panic. She was maybe a mile out, coming straight for the ridges, which meant she was coming straight for him. Colt went still. He watched her for a long minute. He saw the expensive white dress, bunched in her fists. He saw that she was barefoot, stumbling on the sharp rock. He saw the terror in the angle of her head. He was a man who recognized trouble on sight. This was trouble of the worst kind, the kind involving lace and, most likely, a man. His first instinct was to step behind the wagon, to let her run past. His camp was well hidden. She would likely not even see him. But then he saw her pursuers, Two men running with the heavy, determined gait of hounds who have the scent. They were gaining. They were not running in panic. They were running with purpose. Lila saw the wagon first, a dark shape tucked into an alcove of red rock. Then she saw the man. He was standing beside it, unmoving, watching her. A new jolt of fear shot through her. A lone man in the wilderness. She was running from one monster into the arms of another. But the men behind her were shouting, their voices closer now. She had no choice. She stumbled into the small clearing, her lungs on fire. She collapsed against the side of his wagon, sliding down the rough wood to sit in the dust, unable to draw a full breath. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with animal terror, her chest heaving. Her feet were a ruin of blood and dirt. "Please," she gasped, though she did not know what she was asking for. "Please, they—" Colt Mercer looked at her for one long second. He saw the raw cuts on her feet. He saw the desperation. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers who knew they were about to die. He turned his head. The two men crashed into the clearing, pulling up short when they saw him. They were big, wearing range clothes, their faces flushed with the run and with anger. One of them, a thick-necked man with a drooping mustache, put his hand on the butt of his pistol. "That girl," the man panted, pointing at Lila. "She's Harlan property. The judge wants her back." Colt did not look at them. His gaze was fixed on Lila, who was cowering against the wheel, trying to make herself small. He saw the faint, red marks of fingers on her upper arm, where someone had gripped her too hard. He moved slowly, deliberately. He reached into the wagon bed and pulled out his jacket. It was heavy canvas, lined with wool, stained with grease and smelling of wood smoke. He did not hand it to her. He walked over and draped it around her shoulders, covering the white lace, covering her. Lila flinched at his touch, but the weight of the jacket was a sudden, shocking comfort. It was warm. Colt turned to the two men. His rifle was leaning against the wagon, well within reach. He did not touch it. He simply stood between them and the girl. "My wife is sick," Colt said. His voice was low and flat, like stones rubbing together. "She's got a fever," got confused and wandered off. The two men stared. The man with the mustache gaped. "Your wife? Hell, man, that's Lila Addison. She was marrying Judge Harlan not half an hour ago. She run right from the altar." Colt's expression did not change. He nodded, as if this made sense. That would be the fever talking. "She's been saying all kinds of nonsense. Took this dress from a line, I reckon. She ain't been right in the head for a week." He looked down at Lila, his gaze unreadable. "She's under my care." Lila stared up at him, her mind reeling. His words were a shield, thrown up around her. She huddled deeper into the jacket, pulling the collar up, hiding her face. The second man, younger and carrying a shotgun, shuffled his feet. "Look, mister, we don't want no trouble, but Judge Harlan is a powerful man. He says find her. We find her. That girl belongs to him." "She's my wife," Colt repeated. The words were not loud, but they were final. There was no argument in them. There was only fact. He still had not moved toward his rifle. He did not need to. The stillness in him was more dangerous than any weapon. The man with the mustache studied Colt. He saw the set of his shoulders, the way his hands hung loose at his sides. He saw the lean, hard competence of a man who had survived things. He also saw the clean rifle, the single bedroll, the lack of any comforts. This was a man with nothing to lose, the most dangerous kind of man to cross, confronting a lone cowboy with a rifle, miles from town, over a girl who was clearly terrified, was a bad bet. "You're making a mistake," the man said, trying to sound threatening, but his hand had moved away from his pistol. "The judge always collects what's his. He'll find out. He'll remember you." Colt nodded once. "He's welcome to try." The two men looked at each other. The fight was gone from them. This was not worth dying for. "Come on, Jeb," the older one muttered. "We'll tell him she went north." They backed away slowly, their eyes still on Colt, then turned and crashed back through the brush, their retreat heavy and sullen. Lila and Colt stood in the sudden, ringing silence. The only sounds were the wind whistling in the rocks and Lila's own ragged breathing. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Colt watched the men until they were long gone. Then he turned, not to her, but to his wagon. He picked up his canteen, unhooked a tin cup from his pack, and poured an inch of water into it. He walked over and held it out to her. She reached for it, her hands trembling so badly she could not take it. He grunted, a sound of impatience, and knelt. He put the cup to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. The water was warm and tasted of tin, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. It cut through the dust in her throat. She drank it all, then sagged back against the wheel. He stood up and tossed a square of hardtack and a long, dark strip of dried meat onto the ground near her feet. "Eat, you'll need it." He went back to his wagon wheel as if she were not there. He picked up the jack and the oily rag and got back to work. The sounds of metal scraping on metal and the low, steady rhythm of his breathing were the only things in the clearing. Lila stared at the food. She was starving, but the thought of eating was impossible. She watched him. He did not look at her. He offered no soft words, no comfort. He had saved her, and now he was ignoring her. The gesture was, in its own way, a kindness. He was giving her space to breathe, to pull herself back from the brink. She pulled his jacket tighter. It enveloped her. The smell of him, smoke, leather, sweat, and something clean, like pine, filling her senses. It was the first moment she had felt safe in months. After several long minutes, her trembling subsided. She picked up the hardtack. Her hands were filthy, streaked with blood and dirt. She did not care. She ate, the dry biscuit scraping her raw throat. She tore at the jerky with her teeth. When she was finished, Colt still had his back to her. He was tightening a bolt, his muscles working smoothly under his thin shirt. "You brought trouble," he said, not turning around. "You got blood on my wagon." Lila looked down. A small smear of blood from her hand stained the wood. I'm sorry. Sorry don't fix a loose wheel." He gave the bolt a final, hard twist and stood. He turned to face her, wiping his hands on the rag. His gray eyes were flat, assessing. "I saved you from them. That don't mean I'm saving you from him. Who is he? And why does he want you back so bad he sends armed men after you?" Lila flinched. His voice was not kind. It was rough, demanding. He was not her savior. He was a man who had been inconvenienced, and he wanted answers. "His name," she said, her voice small and hoarse, "is Judge Royston Harlan." Colt's head tilted, just slightly. He knew the name. Everyone in this territory knew it. "You stole from him?" he asked. "No." Lila shook her head, the motion making her dizzy. I was marrying him." Colt's expression hardened. "You're a runaway bride." He spat in the dust. "I should have let them take you. I got no use for that kind of trouble." "It was not a choice," Lila whispered, and the desperation rose in her again. "It was a contract. My father. He's in debt to the judge, a deep debt. This was the payment." She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not pity, just a grim understanding. "And you ran," he said. "Why today? Why not yesterday?" Lila's throat closed. She looked down at her bloody feet. "I saw a girl, Clara, a servant. He hurt. He dismissed her. He has a history. With young women. With—" She could not say the words. "My father told me to endure it. He said if I did not, we would all starve." She looked up at him, and for the first time, she let him see the full, raw terror in her eyes. "He would have locked me in. He would have taught me discipline." Like he taught her. Colt looked at her for a long, hard minute. He saw the ripped lace, the blood, the terror that was not just of being caught, but of what would happen after. He had seen the judge in town, seen the way men bowed to him, the way he looked at women. He believed her. He let out a long breath and kicked at the dirt. Damn. It was the only word he said. He turned and looked at the sky. The air had gone still and heavy. The light had turned a sickly yellow-gray. The smell of ozone and wet dust was strong. "You can stay the night," he said, his voice clipped. "There's a storm coming, a bad one." He pointed to a small overhang in the rock face, barely a cave, where he had stored his bedroll and supplies. "Get in there, it's the driest place." Lila struggled to her feet. The pain in her soles was blinding now that the adrenaline was gone. She cried out, a small, sharp sound, and fell back. Colt watched her, his jaw tight. He said nothing, just walked over, bent down, and swung her up into his arms. He did it with no more effort or tenderness than if he were lifting a sack of feed. Lila was too shocked to protest. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her the 20 feet to the overhang and set her down on his bedroll, his back to the rising wind. "In the morning," he said, standing at the mouth of the shallow cave. "I'll take you to 4 Points. It's a day's ride. You can get a stagecoach from there. Head east. Disappear." Lila nodded, pulling the jacket around her. "Thank you." He just grunted. He turned back to his wagon, beginning to secure his tools and lash a canvas tarp over his supplies. He worked with an efficient, practiced speed. The first drop of rain, as fat as a thumb, hit the rock beside him. Then another. Then the sky tore open. It was not just rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that hit the ground and exploded. The wind howled, ripping leaves from the few hardy scrub oaks. Thunder cracked directly overhead, a sound so loud it vibrated in Lila's bones. Colt finished his work and ducked into the overhang, hunkering down on the other side, a good 6 feet away from her. He was soaked through in seconds. They sat in silence, watching the world dissolve. The water ran in sheets down the rock face. The small, dry wash that snaked through the canyon floor 50 yards away was already turning dark with mud. Colt was staring at it, his face grim. "The trail out," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "It follows that wash." Lila looked. The wash was no longer a wash. It was a churning, brown river, carrying debris and small rocks. Colt swore again, a long, quiet string of curses. He looked at Lila, his eyes flat and angry. "There's no taking you to 4 Points in the morning," he said. "That trail's going to be gone for days, maybe a week." Lila's heart sank. She looked at this strange, hard man, at the meager shelter of the rock, and at the impossible violence of the storm. She had escaped the judge, only to be trapped on a mountainside with a stranger, with nothing but a bloody dress and a borrowed jacket. She pulled her knees to her chest, buried her face in the rough wool of his jacket, and finally began to cry. She wept silently, for her father, for Clara, and for the terrifying, unknown days to come. Colt did not move. He just sat and watched the rain, his jaw set. A prisoner of the storm and the woman it had brought him. The storm held them prisoner for 4 days. The shallow overhang became a misery of damp and cold. The wind drove the rain sideways, soaking their blankets and chilling them to the bone. Lila, her feet wrapped in rags Colt had torn from a spare shirt, huddled against the rock, shaking. Colt spent most of the time on his feet, staring into the gray sheet of water, his face a mask of grim impatience. On the second morning, he made a decision. "We're moving," he said over the howl of the wind. "Moving where?" Lila's voice was barely a croak. "We can't get down the trail. I've got a line shack, 1/2 mile up the ridge. Used it for trapping 2 winters ago. It's dry, mostly." He did not ask if she could make the walk. He simply expected it. He packed his mule with their meager supplies, his movements economical and swift. He stamped out the weak, sputtering fire and looked at her. "Stay close. The rock is slick." The walk was a nightmare. The 1/2 mile felt like 10. It was a steep climb, not a trail, just a scramble over wet, treacherous rock and through thick, dripping scrub pine. The wind tried to peel them from the mountainside. Lila's borrowed trousers were soaked and heavy, and the rags on her feet were useless against the sharp stones. She fell twice, her hands raw and bleeding from catching herself. The second time she went down, a sharp cry of pain escaping her. Colt stopped. He turned, his face dark with rain, and looked at her huddled on the ground. She thought he would leave her, or at least yell at her to get up. Instead, he walked back, bent down, and hauled her to her feet, his grip hard on her arm. Almost there, he grunted, and he did not let go. He half dragged, half carried her the last 100 yards. The cabin was generous. It was a shed, really, no more than 12 feet square, built of rough-hewn logs and chinked with mud that was washing away in the deluge. But it had 4 walls, a door that hung on one leather hinge, and a small, crude fireplace of stacked river stones. It was the most beautiful thing Lila had ever seen. Colt pushed the door open and shoved her inside. Get by the hearth. He brought in the supplies. Then his saddle. He tended to his horse and mule, tying them in the meager shelter of the cabin's lee wall, before finally coming inside, slamming the door against the wind. The single room was dark and smelled of mice, wet wood, and old smoke, and it was leaking. A steady drip, drip, drip came from 2 different spots in the sod roof, but there was a small stack of dry wood in the corner, and in 5 minutes, Colt had a small, crackling fire going. The smoke filled the room before finding the chimney, but the warmth was immediate and life-saving. They existed in that tiny space for 2 more days. The storm raged, and the world shrank to the 4 damp walls of the shack. The silence between them was as thick as the rain. Colt sat on his saddle, sharpening his knife, cleaning his rifle, his movements a constant, quiet industry. Lila sat on the bedroll, her back against the wall, and watched him. She hated feeling useless. She had been raised to work. On the 3rd day, the rain had settled into a steady, miserable drizzle, but the roof leak over his saddle had become a stream. "We have to fix that," she said, her voice startling in the quiet. Colt just grunted, not looking up from the snare wire he was mending. "Nothing to fix it with." "There's a piece of tin out back," she said. "I saw it when we came in, under that fallen pine." He looked up, surprised. He had not figured her for the noticing kind. He nodded. "Once." "Go on, then." She went out, bracing herself against the cold drizzle. She found the rusted sheet of tin, heavy and awkward. She dragged it back, her hands muddy, a triumphant, small feeling in her chest. He took it from her without a word. He went out, and she heard him scrambling on the roof. After a minute, he shouted, "I need something to hold this flat, a heavy rock." She searched, her hands numb, and found a stone nearly too heavy to lift. She climbed the rickety outside ladder, her dress, now torn and stained, snagging on the rough wood. He was on his knees by the chimney, wrestling the tin. "Here," she said, holding the rock out. He took it, positioned it, and the sound of the leak inside lessened. He looked at her, soaked and shivering, mud streaked on her face, her lace dress a ruined joke. She was awkward, her movements clumsy, but she was there. She was not the fragile doll she appeared. "Get inside," he said, his voice not unkind. "You'll catch your death." He watched her climb down, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Her grit was a surprise, a complication. At night, the cabin was suffocatingly small. He slept on the floor by the door, his rifle beside him, giving her the only bedroll near the fire. But sleep did not come easily to her. The first night, she just whimpered, her body curled tight. The second night, the dreams found her. She was back at the altar, the judge's thick fingers closing around her wrist. She saw Clara's bruised face, heard her father's weeping. "No," she moaned, the sound a low, desperate plea. "Please don't make me." She thrashed, tangling in the wool blanket, her hands pushing at an invisible weight. "Girl!" The voice cut through the nightmare. She snapped awake, gasping, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her ribs. A shadow was looming over her. She screamed, a short, sharp sound, and scrambled backward against the logs. "You're dreaming," Colt's voice said, flat and low. The fire had burned down to embers, but she could see him now, kneeling a few feet away, He had not touched her. "You were making a racket." He stared at her, his face shadowed. "You're safe here. Go back to sleep." He retreated to his spot by the door. Lila sat shaking for a long, long time, listening to the rain and the quiet rhythm of his breathing. The next night, it was worse. The dream was of running, of her feet bleeding, of the judge's men laughing as they caught her, their hands pulling at her dress. She was crying out, fighting, her arms and legs tangled in the bedroll. This time, when he came, he did not wait. He crossed the room in 2 strides and put his hand on her wrist. His grip was firm, his skin warm. "Lila." He said her name, not girl. Lila. Her eyes flew open. She was staring straight into his. They were pale gray, clear and steady in the dim light. She was breathing like a winded animal. The terror of the dream was still on her, so real she could taste it. "He'll find me," she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. "He'll never stop." Colt held her wrist for a second longer, his thumb pressing against her racing pulse. Then he let go. "He won't find you here," he said. He sat back on his heels, not moving away. The quiet of the cabin, the steady patter of the rain, the solid presence of this man. It all loosened something in her. The confession she had held back, the worst of it, spilled out into the darkness. "It was what he did to Clara," she whispered, tears rolling hot down her cheeks. "The maid. She wasn't just clumsy. He took her to his study for discipline. When she came out, she was broken. He told her if she said a word, he'd have her sent to the asylum. Or worse." She shuddered, pulling her knees to her chest. "My father, he knew what the judge was, and he told me to endure it. He said, he is a rich man. Lila, he will tire of you soon enough. Just endure him, or we all starve." He wanted me to just close my eyes and let it happen. To save them all. She was crying openly now, silent, racking sobs that shook her whole body. She was ashamed of her father, ashamed of her own terror. Colt said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by her grief and the dying fire. She thought, horribly, that he was disgusted by her, by the weakness of her family. Then, in the darkness, she saw him stand up. He was not looking at her. He walked over to his saddle, picked up his bedroll, and walked back. He didn't speak. He just unfolded the heavy wool and canvas roll and laid it over her, tucking it in around her shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled of him, of leather and smoke. He took the thin, single blanket she had been using and went back to his spot, the patch of cold, hard-packed dirt by the door. He lay down, his back to her, and left her with the only real warmth in the room. The gesture was so profound, so silent, it broke her heart. The rain finally stopped on the 5th day. The world was washed clean, but the trail down the canyon was a river of thick, red mud. They were trapped for at least 2 more days, and their food was running low. "If you're gonna survive out here," Colt said that morning, his voice back to its rough, practical tone, "you can't be helpless." He took her out into the damp, sharp air. "You'll learn to provide." He spent an hour showing her how to set a simple snare. His large, rough hands moved with surprising delicacy as he looped the wire, showing her the knot. "You find a game trail," he said, pointing. "See that? Where the leaves are pressed down? You set it right there. The rabbit does the work for you?" She tried 3 times, her fingers numb and clumsy. The wire wouldn't hold. He watched, not helping, just watching. "Again," he said, the 4th time. The loop held. He gave a single, curt nod. Then he pulled his revolver from its holster. The gun was dark, heavy, and oiled. It looked deadly. Lila flinched. I can't." "You will," he said. "You ever shot one?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "This is a Colt. 6 shots." He broke it open, showing her the empty cylinder. "This is how you load it." He took cartridges from his belt and slid them into 5 of the chambers, leaving the one under the hammer empty. "Never rest the hammer on a live round. You fall, it'll take your leg off." His voice was a low, patient monotone. He was a good teacher, attentive. You only pointed at what you mean to kill, not at your foot, not at the sky, not at me. What you mean to kill? You pull the hammer back. He did so, the click-click sounding loud in the quiet woods. Then you squeeze. Don't jerk it. Squeeze. He handed it to her. Butt first. The weight of it shocked her. It was so heavy, a solid, cold piece of metal. I don't want you to fire it, he said. A gunshot travels. But you need to know how. In case I'm not here. In case those men come back. You put it square in the chest. And you squeeze. She held it, her hand trembling, and then gave it back. She felt different. Heavier. That evening, the air was warmer. Colt took a bucket down to the stream to wash. He came back into the cabin as the sun was setting, the light casting long shadows. He had stripped off his shirt to wash, and he was wiping his face and chest with a wet rag, his back to her. In the reddish glow from the fire, she saw it. His back was a ruined map, a dozen thin, white lines, long and parallel, scarred the skin from his shoulders to his waist. They were old, but they were unmistakable. Whip marks. Higher up, on his left shoulder, was a puckered, deep scar, the kind a bullet or shrapnel might make. Lila's breath caught. He had endured his own kind of discipline. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He froze, his muscles tensed. In one swift, angry motion, he grabbed his shirt and pulled it on, hiding the old wounds. "War," he snapped, his voice a blade. "Don't ask again." He turned away from her, his mood suddenly as dark and cold as the nights had been. He went outside to check on the animals, leaving her alone with the fire and the image of his pain. The tension held until the next night. The trail was almost dry. They would leave in the morning. They were eating the last of the dried meat and a small rabbit he had caught in one of his own snares. Lila, determined to break the silence, spoke to his back. "I used to dream of being a teacher," she said, her voice soft. "My mother taught me to read from a single book of Shakespeare. I wanted to have a small school, just books and quiet." Colt was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. He stared into the flames, turning the rabbit on its spit. "I had a brother," he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear. "Elias. He was younger, quiet. He loved books, too." He paused, and his throat worked. "I took him to war with me. Thought I could protect him. He didn't come back. He was killed at Shiloh." He said nothing more. He did not have to. It was the first piece of himself he had truly given her, a small, hard kernel of his own grief. It was more intimate than any touch. The next morning, they rode out. The sun was bright, the air clean. Colt had given her a pair of his old trousers and another shirt. The dress was left behind in the cabin, a symbol of a life that was gone forever. The trousers were held up with a rope, but Lila felt light, free. "Where are we going?" she asked, as he led the way down the treacherous, muddy trail. "Town called Tahoma," he said, not looking back. "It's on the rail line. You can get a train east, go to Chicago. A woman can disappear there." They rode for 2 days, mostly in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was not empty. It was shared. They reached the outskirts of Tahoma in the late afternoon of the second day. It was a raw, bustling town, loud with the clang of a blacksmith's hammer and the shouts of men loading freight onto a train. "Stay with the horses," Colt said, his eyes scanning the street. "I'll check the train schedule and buy you a ticket." He started to swing down from his horse. "Colt!" Lila's voice was sharp with sudden fear. He stopped. "What?" She was staring past him, her face pale, her hand at her throat. "That man, by the telegraph station, with the red shirt." Colt's head snapped around. He saw him. It was not one of the two from the prairie. It was another man, one he had seen in the judge's private study, a man who looked more like a gun guard than a ranch hand. He was standing on the boardwalk, talking to the telegraph operator, clearly waiting for a reply. He was watching the street, The man's gaze started to sweep toward them. He had not seen them yet, but he would. Colt moved without thinking. It was instinct, pure and fast. "Don't look at him," he ordered in a low, harsh voice. He swung off his horse, strode to her side, and grabbed her by the front of her shirt. He hauled her right off the saddle and spun her around, slamming her back against the rough, splintered wood of the feed store wall. Lila cried out in surprise, her mouth opening to ask what he was doing. He covered her mouth with his own. It was not a kiss. It was a collision. It was hard and desperate and bruising. It was meant to be seen. He pressed his body against hers, pinning her to the wall, his hand tangling in her hair, tilting her head back. His other arm was braced by her head, caging her in. He tasted of dust and leather and a faint, sharp hint of whiskey from a flask he must have had. Lila's entire body went rigid with shock. This was the second time a man had put his hands on her without permission. But this was nothing like the judge. This was not the cold, wet claim of ownership. This was a bolt of lightning. It was raw and hot, and it terrified her. It woke every nerve in her body. Out of the corner of his eye, Colt saw the judge's man's gaze slide over them. He saw a cowboy and his girl, tangled up against a wall, a common enough sight in a town like Tahoma. The man's eyes moved on, dismissing them. Colt broke the kiss, but he did not move away. He stayed close, his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. Lila was trembling, her lips stinging, her eyes wide and staring into his. "Act like you're mine," he whispered, his voice a low, rough growl against her skin. Lila, her mind reeling, her body humming with a strange, terrifying new energy, could only manage to nod. "Good," he said. He grabbed her hand, his grip like a steel trap. "Now walk, don't run." He pulled her away from the wall, and they walked, fast but calm, back to the horses. He kept his body between her and the man at the telegraph office. They turned the corner of the livery stable, out of sight. "Get on," he snapped, shoving her toward her horse. They mounted, and this time, they ran. They galloped out of town, heading not east, but north toward the high, empty country, leaving the train and the telegraph and the judge's men behind them. They rode north for 3 days, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. The memory of the kiss in Tahoma was a silent third passenger. It hung in the air between them, a living thing. Lila could still feel the hard, bruising pressure of his mouth, the scrape of his stubble, the way he had pinned her against the wall. It had been an act of calculated performance, a ruse. She knew that, but her body did not. Her lips still tingled. Colt was grim, his face set in hard lines. He was angry, angry at the judge's man, angry at the failed plan, and angry at himself. He had broken his one inviolable rule, no attachments, and in that one desperate, instinctive moment, he had put his hands on her, his mouth on hers. It was a lie, but it had felt true. The feel of her, small and terrified and warm against him, had shaken him. He had spent the last 10 years of his life avoiding that exact feeling. They stopped on the third night by a high, fast-moving stream. The air was already thinner here, biting with a cold that had not existed on the prairie. "We can't follow the river," Colt said, his voice flat as he pulled the saddles from the weary horses. "The judge will have men on every waterway and every main trail. From here, we go up." Lila looked at the wall of sheer, pine-covered rock that rose before them. "Up where?" "Into the high country, the Uintas. It's rough land, hard for a posse to track, hard to travel. They won't expect us to go there, not this late in the season." He squinted at the sky. "It's early for snow, but we'll risk it." Lila rubbed her arms, her thin shirt useless against the wind. "And then, we cross the range, find a different rail line, maybe in Wyoming territory. But it will be slow going. We'll have to hunt for food." He looked at her, his gaze assessing. "It's no place for you." Lila bristled, her chin coming up. I'm not the woman you found on the prairie. I can set a snare, and I'm not afraid of hard living." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. So fast she almost missed it. "Good. Don't slow me down." The landscape turned brutal the next day. They left the last traces of green valleys behind and entered a world of gray rock, steep inclines, and skeletal pines. The wind never stopped. It was a high, thin, howling sound that clawed at them, stealing their breath and their warmth. They climbed trails that were little more than goat paths, leading the horses. Scrambling over loose rock, they struggled for food. The snares Lila set so hopefully each night were empty each morning. The game was scarce, smarter. Colt managed to shoot a single grouse, which they roasted on a spit. It was gone in 5 minutes, a meager mouthful that only made the hunger sharper. They spoke little, saving their breath for the climb. The world was reduced to the burn in their legs, the ache in their empty stomachs, and the constant, screaming wind. On the 4th day in the mountains, the first snow came. It was not a gentle flurry. It was a cold, wet, heavy sleet that turned the rocks slick and the ground into a treacherous mush. It soaked their clothes, penetrated their blankets. The cold was a physical weight, a presence that sought to drain the life from them. They found a shallow overhang to camp, huddling together for warmth, the horses shivering beside them. Lila's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. "We can't stop here," Colt said, his face a mask of worry as he looked at the darkening, swirling sky. "We'll freeze by morning. I know a place. An old trapper's shack. It's a few miles north. We have to make it." They pushed on, visibility dropping to almost nothing. The snow was falling faster now, thick and wet, covering the already dangerous ground. Colt was in the lead, pulling his horse, testing the ground with each step. They were crossing a wide field of scree, the loose rock hidden by a few inches of fresh, wet snow. It happened fast. Colt's foot, planted on what looked like solid ground, met a sheet of ice-covered stone. His boot slipped. He went down, his body twisting, his full weight landing on his left leg. A sharp, ugly crack echoed in the snow-filled silence. It was not the sound of a bone, but of a dry pine branch snapping. But it was followed by a low, violent curse from Colt that cut through the wind. He tried to stand. He got to one knee, his face pale and slick with sweat. And when he tried to put weight on his left foot, his leg buckled. "Damn it," he hissed, falling back against the rock. Lila was at his side in a second. "What is it? What happened?" "My ankle," he growled, his jaw clamped shut against the pain. "Slipped, twisted it." He was clearly in agony. This was the first time she had seen him as anything but completely, terrifyingly competent. For the first time, he was the one who was vulnerable. The realization focused her. "Can you ride?" she asked, her voice calm. "I'm fine," he said, trying again to stand, but the pain was too much. "You're not fine," Lila said, her tone firm, leaving no room for argument. "You're a terrible liar. We need to get out of this storm. Get on your horse, now. I'll lead." He looked at her, a flash of surprised respect in his pained eyes. He was in no position to argue. He dragged himself to his horse, hissing in pain as he pulled himself into the saddle. "The shack," he grunted, his leg dangling uselessly. "It's north, in that stand of thick pine, about a mile. Look for the chimney." Lila took the reins of his horse and her own, and she led them into the swirling white. She was the leader now. She was the one who had to get them to safety. The shack was barely standing. A tiny, one-room box of logs, half buried in old snowdrifts, but it had a stone chimney, and the roof, miraculously, looked whole. She got Colt off his horse, his arm slung around her shoulder, his weight almost crushing her. He hopped, groaning, into the tiny, dark room. It was sparse, a rough-hewn bunk in the corner, a small cast-iron stove, a single three-legged stool, but it was shelter. Lila eased him onto the bunk, his face gray with pain. "The stove," he panted. "There should be wood." She found a small stack of dry kindling and a few split logs under the bunk. She had a fire going in minutes, the small stove radiating a blessed, dry heat. She tended the horses, then came back inside. Colt was lying back, his eyes closed, his leg propped up. His boot was swollen tight, the leather straining. "I need to get this off," she said. "Go ahead." She took his knife from his belt. He did not even flinch at her taking his weapon, and carefully, gently, cut the stitches up the side of the thick leather boot. She eased it off, along with his wool sock. The ankle was already a terrible, dark purple, swollen to nearly twice its normal size. "It's not broken, I don't think," she said, her voice quiet. "But it's a bad sprain. Won't be walking on it for a while," he muttered, his eyes still closed. Lila looked around. She found an old, rusted bucket. "I'll get snow. We need to get the swelling down." For the next 2 hours, she nursed him. She packed the ankle with snow wrapped in a rag. When he started to shiver from the cold, she heated water in the bucket and bathed his foot. She was gentle, her hands moving with a practiced, confident care. He just watched her. He hated this, hated being weak, being tended to. But as she bathed his foot, her touch was not just medical. It was kind. It was a simple, human contact that asked for nothing in return. "You've done this before," he said, his voice quiet. Lila nodded, not looking up from her work. "My father, after his accident, his leg, it pained him. For years, I learned how to be gentle." She finished, wrapping the ankle tightly with strips of cloth she tore from a spare grain sack. She made him some weak, hot coffee from his supplies, and sat on the small stool, staring into the fire as the snow fell outside. That night, the shack was quiet, the only sound the high whistle of the wind and the crackle of the fire. Colt was propped up on the bunk. Lila had made a small bed for herself on the floor, as close to the stove as she could get. The kiss was still between them. Now, in this forced, quiet intimacy, it was impossible to ignore. "Colt?" she said into the darkness. He was silent for a moment. "Yeah, I need to say something about Tahoma." He tensed. "I told you. It was a ruse, to save our skins." "I know." She paused, gathering her courage. "But I wanted to thank you for it." He turned his head on the bunk, looking at her, his silhouette dark against the wall. "Thank me? For what? For kissing you like that?" "Not for the safety," she said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. "Not for fooling that man." She looked down at her hands, which were twisting in her lap. "All my life, I've been an asset, something to be traded. To my father, I was a way out of debt. To the judge, I was a purchase, a new piece of property." She looked up, and even in the dim, red glow from the stove, he could see the tears shining in her eyes. "When you kissed me, it was hard, and it frightened me. But it was the first time in my entire life that anyone has looked at me, or touched me, like I was wanted, not just owned." Colt stared at her. He had no words. He had meant to use her. He had meant it as a disguise, an act of possession to fool another man. And instead, this strange, quiet, brave woman had found humanity in it. She had taken his lie and turned it into a truth. He looked away, back into the shadows. His throat felt tight. "Get some sleep, Lila," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. A few days passed. The snow stopped, but the world outside was a deep, frozen white. They were trapped. Colt's ankle was still too swollen to move. Lila took charge of their survival. She tended the fire, fetched water, and ventured out to check the snares she set. She finally caught a rabbit, and the smell of it roasting in the tiny cabin was a miracle. She was changing. The fear was still there, but it was buried deep. On the surface, she was calm, capable, and she was no longer afraid of him. On the third night, she decided they both needed to wash. She hung his spare blanket over a rope, splitting the tiny room in half, creating a curtain of privacy. "You can have the stove side," she said. "I'll take the corner." He found the gesture. thoughtful, almost tender. He washed as best he could, sitting on the bunk. Then it was her turn. She disappeared behind the blanket. Colt was sitting on the bunk, his back to the curtain, trying to mend a strap on his saddlebag. The light was dim, coming only from the stove and a single candle. He stood, using a cut branch as a crutch, to add a log to the fire. As he turned, the movement, or maybe a draft, caused the heavy wool blanket to shift, to gap open for just a second. He froze. He saw her. She was in silhouette, standing in the corner, her back to him. She had just taken off her shirt. It was not the sight of her bare skin that stopped his heart. It was the marks. They were not like his. His were old, white, and faded. The memory of a war 20 years gone. Hers were new. They were raised, angry. Red-purple welts, crisscrossing her back from her shoulders to her waist. Fresh scars, whip marks. The blood drained from his face. This was not the judge. This was not a future she was running from. This was a past she had just escaped. The discipline she spoke of. She had not been guessing. She had been describing. He turned away, a sick, hot rage rising in his throat. He sat on the bunk, his hands shaking, his knuckles white as he gripped the broken strap. He understood. Now, he understood her bone-deep terror of the judge. He understood why she had run barefoot into the wilderness. After a few minutes, she came out from behind the blanket. She was wearing his spare shirt, which was far too large for her. The sleeves rolled up. It made her look small and terribly young. She was unaware he had seen anything. She walked to her bedroll on the floor. "Good night, Colt," she said softly, her voice a little shy. He was staring at the stove, his back to her. He could not trust himself to look at her. "Lila," he said. He cleared his throat, but his voice was thick, unsteady. "Good night." The single word was full of a raw, shaking emotion he could not hide. Lila heard it. She stopped, halfway to her bed, and frowned into the darkness. She heard the tremor in his voice, the thing that sounded almost like pain. She said nothing, but as she lay down, she felt the very air in the room shift. He was no longer just her protector. He was a witness. The next day, he was different. He was quieter, but he watched her. His gray eyes followed her as she moved about the small cabin, no longer with the flat, assessing gaze of a stranger, but with a new, raw, almost painful intensity. Lila felt the change, and it made her bold. He was the one who was off balance now. In the morning, when she handed him his tin cup of coffee, she did not pull her hand away immediately. She let her fingers brush his. His hand jerked, and he looked up at her, his eyes wide, startled. She met his gaze, calm, and held it. Later, as he sat on the bunk showing her how to properly clean his revolver, she leaned in, her shoulder pressing against his, her hair brushing his cheek as she looked down. "You are very good with your hands," she said, her voice soft, echoing the words he had said to her. He stopped moving. "Lila," he said, his voice a low warning. "What?" she asked, her voice full of a soft, teasing innocence. "It's true." He looked at her, at the small, knowing smile playing on her lips, and he felt like he was the one who had been snared. That night, the cold returned, worse than before, a deep, biting frost that crept through the logs. The fire in the stove was a small, brave circle of heat in a sea of freezing dark. Lila, on the floor, was shivering so violently her teeth chattered, the sound loud in the small room. Colt lay on the bunk, listening, his jaw tight. He endured it for an hour, and then he could not. "Damn it," he said into the darkness. Lila's shivering stopped. "What? Get over here. Get in the bunk. You'll freeze to death on the floor." "Colt, I can't. That's your... It's a wide bunk," he snapped, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "It's wide enough for two. Just stop shaking. Get in." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to the bunk. She slipped under the heavy wool bedroll, keeping to the very edge, her back to him. The cot was small. She was pressed against the cold log wall. He was on his side, his back to her. They lay like that, rigid, two bodies in the dark, separated by a tiny, agonizing distance. But the cold was too deep, and the proximity was electric. After an hour of this silent torture, she heard him let out a long, ragged breath. He turned, slowly, tentatively. She turned to face him. They were inches apart in the dark. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could not stop shivering. "I can't get warm," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. He moved first. He reached out and pulled her against him. It was a simple, desperate huddle for survival. He tucked her body against his chest, his arms coming around her, pulling the bedroll tight. "Better," he muttered, his voice rumbling against her ear. She nodded, pressing her face into the rough wool of his shirt. Her body, small and trembling, fit against his as if it were made to be there. She sighed, a small, shuddering sound of pure relief, and her body, finally, began to go lax. But it was not just about survival, not anymore. His hand moved, his fingers tangling in her hair. Her hand, trapped between them, came to rest on his chest. She could feel the steady, hard beat of his heart under her palm. Skin to skin. His breath hitched. He could smell her hair, the clean, faint scent of soap and wood smoke. He felt the soft, full length of her against him. The protective fury he felt for her. The desire from the kiss. The shared pain of their scars. It all combined into a single, overwhelming need. He shifted, his mouth finding her temple, her cheek. He was shaking, just as she had been. Lila tilted her head back, her hand clutching his shirt. This was not a ruse. This was real. He was about to kiss her, to take the mouth she had said she wanted, when he suddenly tore himself away. He rolled, sitting up on the edge of the bunk, his back to her, his head in his hands. He was breathing hard, his shoulders shaking. The cold air rushed into the space between them. Lila stared at his back, the sense of rejection, a physical pain. "Colt, what is it?" she whispered. "This is wrong," he said, his voice ragged. He was trying to convince himself. "It's just the cold. It's just this place." He turned to look at her, his face a mask of self-loathing. "You don't know what you want. Lila, you're scared. You're grateful. You're cold. You just need to feel something different." He was throwing her own words back at her, twisting them into a weapon. She flinched, as if he had struck her. She stared at him, her eyes wide. He thought he had made her see reason. Then he heard it. A small, choked sob. He had been wrong. He had not shamed her. He had wounded her. She was not crying from fear or confusion. She was crying because he had denied her. He had denied them. "You're wrong," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You're wrong." She turned away from him, curling into a small ball on the edge of the bunk, her shoulders shaking. Colt sat there, the cold of the room nothing compared to the ice in his gut. He was a coward. He had faced down guns and war, but he was terrified of this small woman and the truth she saw in him. He sat for a long time. Finally, he turned back. He lay down, not touching her. The few inches between them a vast, cold canyon. He put his hand on her shoulder. Her skin was hot through the thin shirt. "Lila," he muttered. I'm sorry," she sniffed, and after a long moment, she turned. Her face was wet with tears. In the dim light, she looked at him, her eyes searching his. And then she moved. She did not press against him with desire. She just moved into his arms, burrowing her face against his chest, seeking comfort. He held her. He held her all night, his chin resting on the top of her head, his arms wrapped tightly around her. They did not kiss. They did not make love. They just held on. Two scarred, lonely people in a frozen, dangerous world, and for the first time in a very long time. As the wind howled outside, neither of them felt entirely alone. They rode for another week, descending the western slope of the Uintas. Colt's ankle had healed from a sprain to a dull, persistent ache, a physical reminder of his dependence on her. The fragile peace they had found in the shack had followed them, but it was an uneasy, unspoken thing. The night they had held each other, skin to skin, was a wall between them. He was careful not to touch her. He rode a few paces ahead, his back a rigid wall of denial. She was patient. She watched him, and she waited. The landscape flattened, the air growing thick and dusty. They were out of the high country, and they needed a place to disappear. "I know a town," Colt said, breaking a 2-hour silence. "Silver Pine. It's a mining camp. Rough, full of transients. A good place to get lost." "Do you know anyone there?" she asked. He hesitated, just for a second. "Someone. From a long time ago." Silver Pine was not a town. It was a wound in the earth. It clung to a mountainside, a noisy, muddy scar of raw lumber, tents, and slag heaps. The main street was a river of mud, populated by rough men with hollow, desperate eyes. The clang of hammers, the rumble of ore carts, and the constant, tinny music from a dozen saloons merged into a wall of sound. "Stay close," Colt said, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his revolver. This was not a place for a woman. It was barely a place for a man. He led her through the chaos, past the assayer's office, the bathhouse, and a dozen tents advertising cheap whiskey and cheaper comforts. He stopped in front of the largest, most permanent building, the Gilded Cage Saloon. It was 2 stories, and unlike the other buildings, it was painted. The saloon was loud, even in the afternoon. It smelled of stale beer, wet wool, and fried fat. A player piano hammered out a tune in the corner. Men in filthy clothes crowded the bar, their voices raised. Behind the bar, a woman was wiping down the heavy oak. She was in her late 40s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the sharp, intelligent eyes of someone who had seen every kind of trouble and survived it. She looked up when they entered. The noise in her head seemed to quiet. Her eyes went from Colt to Lila, and back to Colt. She stopped wiping. "Colt Mercer," she said, her voice a low, gravelly sound that cut through the noise. "I figured the war or a rope had gotten you 10 years ago." "Hello, Bess," Colt said. He stood in front of her, his hat in his hands. He looked younger, less sure. Bess's eyes lingered on Lila. She saw the men's clothes, soaked and torn. She saw the exhaustion, the fine-boned prettiness, and the fear just under the surface. But she also saw the way Lila stood near Colt, not behind him, but with him. She saw the way Colt angled himself, just slightly, to keep the other men from looking at her too hard. "You look like hell," Bess said to Colt. "And your friend looks worse." "We need a room, Bess," Colt said, his voice low. "A quiet one, and a bath. We can pay." Bess stared at him for a long, hard second. She saw the desperation and the way he held himself, protective. "A quiet one," she repeated. She dried her hands on her apron. "No questions. No questions," Colt confirmed. "It'll cost you," she said, her eyes flinty. "I'll work it off." Bess nodded, satisfied. "I've got a room in the back, used for storage, mostly, but it's got a bed and a lock, and it don't face the street." She tossed a heavy iron key onto the bar. "Room 4. Go up the back stairs. I'll have someone haul hot water up." "Thank you, Bess," Lila whispered, her voice hoarse. Bess just grunted, turning her back to them to grab a bottle. "Don't thank me. Just don't bring your trouble to my bar." She looked at Colt over her shoulder. "We'll talk later." The room was small, cramped, and smelled of dust and old linens, but it had a real bed with a real mattress, a washstand, and a door that locked. After the line shacks in the cold ground, it was a palace. For a while, they lived. It was a strange, suspended time. They existed in the small, safe bubble of Silver Pine, with the tough, silent Bess as their guardian. They were 2 ghosts, hiding in the noise. Colt found work immediately. Bess's freight man had broken a leg in a drunken fall. Colt, with his bad ankle, was a good replacement. He started hauling barrels of beer and sacks of flour from the freight depot to the saloon cellar. It was hard, back-breaking work, but it was honest. It was anonymous, and it earned them their room. Lila refused to be idle. She had spent her life as a burden. She would not be one now. She asked Bess for work. Bess looked her up and down, her gaze sharp. "You ain't built for saloon work, girl. The boys in this town'll eat you alive." "I can clean," Lila insisted. "I can scrub floors. I can wash linens. I'll clean the rooms upstairs." Bess, seeing the iron determination in Lila's eyes, a look that mirrored her own, relented. "Fine, 6 in the morning. You'll clean the rooms and the saloon. Before the customers get in, you'll keep your head down, and you'll speak to no one." Lila did. She spent her days scrubbing, washing, and changing sheets in the small, shabby rooms above the saloon. It was humbling, anonymous work, and she loved it. She was earning her keep. She was invisible. She saved her meager pay, pennies at a time. After 2 weeks, she walked to the mercantile. She bought a bar of lavender soap. She bought a pair of sturdy woman's boots that fit, and she bought a dress. It was not lace or satin. It was simple, dark blue calico, with a high neck and long sleeves. When she put it on, she looked in the small, cracked mirror in their room. She saw not her father's daughter, not the judge's bride, just Lila. She began to regain her joy. It came in small, quiet moments. She found a stack of old newspapers and magazines in the storage room, and she spent her evenings reading, her stockinged feet propped up on the small, cold stove in their room, her lips moving as she devoured stories from Chicago, from New York, from a world she had only dreamed of. Colt would watch her. He would come in, tired and sore, his shoulders aching, and find her lost in a page. He would sit on the edge of the bed, just watching the firelight on her face, and a strange, tight feeling would fill his chest. It felt terrifyingly like peace. He had not felt peace in 20 years. One night, they were in the saloon. It was late, past 2 in the morning. The last drunk had been thrown out. Bess was counting coins at the bar, her face grim. The piano player, a sad man named Silas, was playing a slow, gentle waltz, just for himself, before he went to bed. Lila was sweeping the floor. Colt was stacking chairs. The music was sweet and thin, and it filled the empty, smoke-filled room. Lila stopped sweeping. She looked at Colt. "I've never danced," she said softly. "Not really. Only at church socials, where you're not allowed to touch." Colt stopped, a heavy oak chair in his hands. "I'm no good at it. Lila." He had not been to a dance since before the war. "I don't care," she said. She was smiling, a small, shy smile. She put down her broom and walked over to him. She held out her hand. "Dance with me, Colt." He looked at her hand. He looked at Bess, who was watching them with a faint, knowing smirk. He looked back at Lila, at her clear, hopeful eyes. He saw the woman she was becoming, strong and sure. He sighed, a long, slow breath, and put the chair down. He wiped his palms on his trousers. "All right," he muttered, "but don't blame me when I break your foot." He took her hand. It felt small and warm in his. He put his other hand on her waist, and she put her hand on his shoulder. It was the first time they had touched, truly touched, since that night in the shack. It was not for warmth, not for safety. It was just a touch. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first. He was stiff, unused to this. She was light, following his lead. The tinny piano played. They were alone in the center of the vast, empty saloon, turning slowly in a circle. He was not a good dancer. She did not care. She leaned her head, just for a moment, against his shoulder. He could smell the lavender soap in her hair. He tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her closer. He closed his eyes. They were not running. They were not fighting. They were just being. The music ended. The last chord hung in the air. They did not stop. They just stood in the middle of the floor, holding each other. Silas, the piano player, quietly closed the piano lid and slipped out the back door. Bess finished her counting, covered the coins with a cloth, and walked to the stairs. "Lock up, Colt," she said, not looking at them, "and put that last lamp out." And she was gone. They were alone. The only light came from the single lamp left burning on the bar. Colt looked down at her. "Lila," he whispered, his voice thick. "I know," she said. She did not move away. She looked up at him, her eyes dark and full of a quiet, steady knowledge. He kissed her. This was not the bruising, desperate kiss of Tahoma. This was not the hungry, cold kiss of the shack. This was slow. It was tentative. It was a question. She answered by kissing him back, her hand moving from his shoulder to his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. The desire that had been simmering for weeks, in the storm, on the trail, in the small, shared room, finally boiled over. He lifted her into his arms, and she weighed nothing. He carried her through the silent saloon and up the back stairs to their room. He kicked the door shut and, for the first time, locked it against the world. The room was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight coming through the single, dirty window. He set her down, but he did not let her go. He began to unbutton the simple calico dress, his rough fingers clumsy and shaking. She did not wait. She began to unbutton his shirt, her own hands trembling. It was slow, aching. Every touch was a discovery. He turned her gently and saw the scars on her back, the ones he'd glimpsed in the shack. They were healing, fading from angry red to a pale rose, but they were there. He touched them, his calloused fingers tracing the raised welts with a reverence, a painful, shared understanding. He kissed her shoulder, his lips gentle on the damaged skin. Lila shuddered, but it was not from fear. It was from release. He was marked, too. She touched the old, white lines on his back, the puckered scar on his shoulder. She kissed the center of his chest, right over his pounding heart. They were two broken, scarred people, finding a whole new and terrifying language in the dark. In the narrow bed, it was she who guided him. She, who had only known fear and duty, took the lead. She pushed him back onto the pillows, her hair falling around her face as she looked down at him. She was reclaiming not just her body, but her power. She wanted this. She chose this. When he moved inside her, it was with a tenderness that shattered them both. It was not a taking. It was a shelter. It was the end of running, the end of loneliness, a quiet, desperate, and finally, peaceful coming home. They lay tangled together as the first gray light of dawn crept into the room. Lila was curled against his side, her head on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart. He was awake, watching her, terrified by the depth of the peace he felt. She stirred, her eyes opening. She looked up at him. The shyness was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a clear, certain calm. She smiled, a slow, real smile. She lifted her head and kissed him, a soft, sleepy kiss. "Colt," she whispered. "I'm here." She settled back down, her voice a murmur against his skin. "I know what I want now." He closed his eyes, his arms tightening around her. He knew what he wanted, too, and it scared him to death. The peace lasted 2 more days. 2 days of stolen glances, of hands brushing as they worked, of returning to their small room at night with a new, shared secret. Then the trouble found them. It started 400 miles away, in a dusty telegraph office. A message, paid for by a man who had eyes in every town, finally got a reply. Bride scene, Silver Pine, Gilded Cage Saloon, Cowboy with her. Judge Royston Harlan read the telegram, and his face, usually ruddy, turned a dark, mottled purple. It was not just the girl, it was the man. He knew, instantly, who it had to be. Within a day, the bounty was posted. It happened on a cold, bright morning. Lila was coming back from the mercantile with a loaf of bread. She saw a small crowd gathered around the sheriff's office. She paid it no mind until she saw the new paper tacked to the board. It was a wanted poster. She stopped, her blood turning to ice. But it was not her face. It was not her name. Wanted for murder. $500. Underneath was a drawing, a likeness that was poor, but unmistakable. It was Colt, but the name was wrong, known as Cole or Mercer. Real name, Coulter Evans. She read the description. Murder of a Confederate officer. 1864. Last seen in Tennessee. She ran back to the saloon, clutching the bread, her heart hammering. She found Colt in the cellar, stacking crates. "Colt!" she panted, holding out the poster she had ripped from the wall. He took it, he read it, and every bit of color drained from his face. The peace of the last few days vanished, replaced by the old, hunted look. "He found us," Colt said, his voice a dead, flat monotone. "Damn him, he found me." Just then, Bess appeared at the top of the cellar stairs. Her face was grim. "Colt, you need to see this." They followed her up to the bar. She pointed out the front window. Two men, strangers, were riding slowly down the street. They were not miners. They were hard-faced, wearing new dusters, and their hands never strayed far from their guns. They were looking at every building. "They rode in about 20 minutes ago," Bess said, her voice low. "Came from the south. They've been asking questions, asking about a cowboy and a girl." Colt watched the men pass. He crumpled the wanted poster in his fist. "We're leaving," he said. "Now, pack your things." He was already moving, heading for the back stairs. "No." He stopped, his foot on the first stair. He turned. Lila was standing in the middle of the room, her hands clenched at her sides. The loaf of bread lay forgotten on a table. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said no." Her voice was quiet, but it was hard as steel. "I'm done running. Colt, I've been running my whole life. From my father, from the judge. I ran with you. I won't run anymore." "Lila, this is not a choice," he said, his voice a low, angry growl. "Those are bounty men, or the judge's men. They will take you. They will kill me. That poster, it's a death warrant." "And what happens when we run to the next town?" she demanded, stepping toward him. "And the next, he'll chase me until I'm dead or back in a cage. And now he'll chase you, too. I will not live like that. You don't understand," he said, grabbing her arm. "This isn't about you, not this time." "Then what is it about?" she cried, pulling her arm free. "What is this? Coulter Evans? Murder?" Colt looked from her to Bess, who was watching, her face impassive. He let out a long, ragged breath and ran his hand over his face. He looked like a man trapped. "Tell me," Lila insisted, her voice softer now. "You have to tell me. We're in this together. You said that." He looked at her, at the strength in her face, the strength he had helped build. He owed her the truth. "It was during the war," he said, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on a point over her shoulder. Seeing a past she could not. "After Shiloh, I was hard, changed. I was a scout, working behind the lines." He paused, his throat working. "We took a small town in Tennessee. The commanding officer, he was a man who liked comforts. He found a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. He took her into his office." Lila's face went white. She put her hand to her mouth. She knew this story. "I heard her screaming." Colt continued, his voice dead. "The other men, they turned up the music. They ignored it. I didn't." "Colt, I kicked the door in. He was hurting her, like the judge." He stopped. "No, not like the judge. He was an officer. He had power. He laughed at me." Colt's hand went to his own holster, an unconscious, phantom gesture. "So I killed him. I shot him 3 times, right in his own office. The girl, I got her out a back window. But self-defense," Lila whispered. "You saved her?" "It was murder," Colt said, his voice hard. "He was my commanding officer. You can't shoot a CO. It's a hanging offense." "So what happened?" "The man second in command. He found me. He found the body. He knew what happened. He could have had me shot on the spot. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Colt finally met her eyes, and his were full of a cold, old hatred. He was a practical man. He didn't want a scandal. He needed a good scout more than he needed justice. So he covered it up. He wrote in the report that the officer was killed by a rebel sniper. And in exchange, I owed him. I've been running from that debt ever since. "That man," Lila said, her voice trembling, her mind putting the last terrible piece in place. "The one who covered it up." "He was a captain then," Colt said, his voice rough, smart, ambitious, colder than any snake I ever met. He looked out the window at the two men, who were now dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. "His name," Colt said, "was Royston Harlan." The silence in the gilded cage was absolute. It was thick, heavy, and filled with the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of morning light. Bess stood behind the bar, her face like carved stone, her hands hidden. Lila and Colt stood in the middle of the floor, the crumpled wanted poster a declaration of war between them. "Harlan," Colt repeated, the name a curse on his tongue. "He's had this over my head for 20 years, a ghost, a word. I never thought he'd use it. He's using it because of me," Lila said, her voice hollow. "He doesn't just want me back. Colt, he wants to destroy the man who took me. He wants to punish you. He wants to own us," Colt said, his voice a low, vicious growl. "He thinks he owns my past, and he thinks he can buy your future." He looked out the window at the two bounty men, who were now tying their horses. "They'll come in here. They'll ask Bess. She'll lie, but they won't believe her. They'll search the town. They'll find us. So, we run," Bess said, her voice practical. "I've got a cellar door that leads to the alley. 2 good horses in my stable. You can be gone in 5 minutes." "No!" Lila's voice was sharp. She looked at Colt, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, new fire. "He said it. Harlan will chase him. He will chase me. He has power. He has the telegraph. There is no town far enough. There is no corner of this land where he won't find us." "Then what?" Colt snarled, the animal part of him, the cornered, trapped part, taking over. "We wait here. We have a shootout in the street. Don't be a fool. Lila, I can't protect you if you're dead." "I am not asking you to protect me," she said, her voice level. "I am asking you to fight with me. Not with guns. Not here. We can't win like that." "What are you talking about?" "We stop running," she said, her mind working. A desperate, brilliant plan forming from the ashes of her fear. "We go back." Colt stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Go back? To the ranch? That's suicide. He'll have 12 men." "He'll be expecting us to run," Lila said, speaking faster now, the idea taking shape. "He's sent these men to flush us out. He thinks you're just a drifter, a hired gun. He's using your past as a leash. He doesn't know. He doesn't know about us." "What about us?" Bess asked, leaning over the bar. "He doesn't know we're partners." Lila said, "He thinks you found me, and now you're trying to save your own skin. He thinks you're a murderer." "He's right on that last part," Colt said bitterly. "No," Lila said, stepping closer, putting her hands on his chest. "You're not. You're the man who saved that girl. You're the man who saved me. He's the monster, and we have to stop him. How, Lila? How?" "We set a trap," she said, her voice dropping, urgent and low. "We use what he wants. He wants me. He wants you. So we deliver." Colt's eyes narrowed. He saw the logic. The terrible, cold logic. "You're talking about walking right into his parlor?" "Yes," she said, "but not as runaways. He's posted a bounty on you, $500, so you're a bounty hunter, and you've just captured his runaway bride." A slow, dangerous light dawned in Colt's eyes. He looked at Bess. "It's insane." Bess was silent for a long moment. "The girl's right. Colt, running won't solve this. That man, Harlan, he's a cancer. You don't run from cancer. You cut it out." She looked at Lila with a new, profound respect. It's the boldest damn plan I've ever heard. It might even work. He'll know. Colt argued, his mind racing. He'll see my face. He'll know who I am. He hasn't seen you in 20 years. Lila said, You're not a young scout anymore. You're a hard-bitten drifter. And you won't be Coulter Evans. You'll be a bounty man named Mercer. Here to collect. He won't be looking at your face. He'll be looking at me. Colt looked at her, at the resolve in her eyes. The fear was there, but the determination was stronger. She was willing to walk back into the cage, to use herself as bait, to save them both. All right, he said, his voice a low growl. We do it your way. We go back. We end this. Best nodded. All business. You'll need to look the part. Both of you. They left Silver Pine an hour later. Through the back alley, riding Bess's 2 fastest horses. Colt looked like a different man. He wore an old, filthy duster Bess had provided. His face was 3 days unshaven, and a low-brimmed, battered hat shadowed his eyes. He looked mean. He looked dangerous. Lila was back in the blue calico dress, her hair unbrushed and wild, her face streaked with dirt. Before they left, Colt had taken a length of rope. His hands had shaken, just slightly, as he'd bound her wrists. He tied the knot loosely, a simple slip knot she could break free of in a second, but to any observer, she was a prisoner. They rode south for 2 days, avoiding the main roads, the silence between them thick with unspoken terror. The closer they got to the Harlan Ranch, the more Lila trembled. This was her home territory. This was the land she had run from. I'm scared. Colt, she whispered. The second night, as they camped without a fire, he sat beside her, his back against a rock, his rifle across his lap. He did not touch her. He could not. He was the bounty hunter now. He had to be the man who had captured her. I know, he said, his voice a low rasp. You just play your part, act frightened, and let me do the talking. When the time comes, be ready. Ready for what? To run. They arrived at the Harlan Ranch in the late afternoon. The place was just as she remembered. A large, imposing house, painted white, a symbol of the judge's power and civility. It looked quiet. Too quiet. Colt rode right up to the front porch, pulling Lila's horse behind him. He dismounted, strode onto the porch, and hammered on the front door with his fist. A moment later, the door opened. It was one of the judge's house servants, a woman Lila didn't know. Her eyes went wide when she saw Lila, bound and filthy, sitting on the horse. We're here to see the judge. Colt growled, his voice rough. Tell him I've brought him something he lost. The woman scurried away. They waited. Lila's heart was a cold stone in her chest. She was back. She was at the place where her life was supposed to end. Then he appeared. Judge Royston Harlan filled the doorway. He was just as she remembered. Large, imposing, dressed in an expensive suit, his face ruddy, his small eyes assessing. He looked at Colt, then at Lila. A slow, deeply unpleasant smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, smug satisfaction, of ownership confirmed. Well, the judge said, his voice a rich, smooth baritone. The lost lamb returns, and brought by... Whom, exactly? Name's Mercer, Colt said, not moving. I'm a bounty man. I heard you were looking for this. He jerked his head toward Lila. And I'm here about this. He pulled the crumpled wanted poster from his duster and tossed it onto the porch. Seems you and I have a mutual interest. You want her, I want him. Or the money for him. The judge's eyes flickered to the poster, then back to Colt. He did not recognize the man in front of him. He saw exactly what he was meant to see. A dirty, dangerous drifter, here for a payday. You are mistaken, the judge said smoothly. That poster is for a murderer. This girl is just a runaway. She was found with him. Colt lied, his voice flat. Up in the Uintas. He's a slippery bastard. Got away, but I kept her. Figured she was worth something to someone. Turns out, she's worth something to you. The judge's smile widened. The story made sense. It fit his narrative. Indeed, she is. A small, sentimental value. Please, Mr. Mercer, come inside. We have business to discuss. And bring my property. Colt nodded. He walked to Lila's horse and grabbed her by the arm, his grip hard, hauling her down from the saddle. He shoved her, stumbling, toward the porch. Lila played her part. She whimpered, her bound hands held in front of her. She kept her eyes down, her body trembling. As she passed the judge, he reached out. His thick fingers closed around her chin, forcing her head up, his thumb brushing her lip. "You have caused a great deal of trouble, my dear," he whispered, his breath sour with whiskey. "A great deal. You will have a lifetime to make up for it." Lila trembled, but it was not an act. His touch was a violation. It was cold and proprietary, and it filled her with a sick, blinding terror. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. She looked at Colt. Colt's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes, under the brim of his hat, were burning. He saw the touch. He saw her terror, and Lila saw, in that split second, a promise of violence so pure it frightened her almost as much as the judge. "Inside," the judge said, gesturing. "We will have a drink and settle our accounts." They walked into the parlor. It was a dark, heavy room, filled with thick velvet curtains, leather-bound books, and the stuffed heads of animals. It was the room where the judge had disciplined Clara. It was a tomb. "Sit," the judge said, pointing to 2 chairs. He walked to a sideboard. "Whiskey? I'll stand," Colt said, "and I'll pass on the drink. Let's just talk about the money." "Ah, yes, the money." The judge poured himself a generous drink, his back to them. "You've brought her back. I am grateful. There is a reward, $100, I believe I said." "That's not what I heard," Colt said. "I heard 500, same as the poster." The judge turned, one eyebrow raised. 500? For a runaway girl?" "She's not just a girl," Colt said, his voice flat. "She's your bride, and she was found with a wanted murderer. That makes her complicated, makes her capture dangerous. $500? Or I take her to the sheriff in the next county and tell them, 'I found her,' and you can explain to them why your name is on a wanted poster next to a killer's." It was a bluff, a desperate one. The judge was still for a moment, his small eyes narrowing. He was assessing this rough man. He saw greed. He saw a threat. He could have him killed, but that would be messy. "You are a bold man, Mr. Mercer," the judge said. He smiled. "I respect that. Very well. $500 it is." He reached into his desk drawer. Colt's hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward his gun, but the judge only pulled out a small key. He walked to a large iron safe hidden behind a painting. "A man of my position must keep such sums on hand." He worked the combination, his back to them. Lila's heart was hammering. It was working. It was actually working. The safe door swung open. The judge reached inside. "Of course," the judge said, his voice conversational. "There is a small complication." He turned around. He was not holding a bag of money. He was holding a small, silver-plated derringer, and he was not alone. From behind the thick velvet curtains on either side of the room, 2 men stepped out. They were the same 2 men from the prairie. The men who had chased Lila, and they were both holding shotguns, aimed directly at Colt. "You see, Mr. Mercer," the judge said, his smile now a triumphant, cruel sneer. "I always collect what is mine, and I never pay for it twice." Colt had not moved. He had been double-crossed. He was trapped. "You're a fool, Mercer." The judge gloated. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize him?" He stepped toward Colt, his eyes alight with a terrible, old hatred. "It took me a moment. 20 years is a long time, but the eyes are the same. Coulter Evans, the self-righteous killer who murdered his commanding officer. My, the world is small." Colt's face was ashen. He had not just failed. He had been recognized. You killed him," Lila whispered, staring at the judge, her mind reeling. The officer. It wasn't. It was you. A semantic. The judge waved his hand. He was a fool and a degenerate. But he was my fool, and this mongrel broke the chain of command. He cost me a great deal. He looked at Colt. Now, you have cost me again. You stole my bride. You embarrassed me. And you have walked into my home. He aimed the derringer at Colt's chest. Jeb, take the girl. The man with the mustache moved forward, the shotgun never wavering. He grabbed Lila's arm. It happened in a fraction of a second. The man grabbed her. Colt moved. He did not go for his own gun. He knew he would be dead. He dove, sideways, at the judge, grabbing the arm with the derringer. Now, Colt! Lila screamed. The judge fired. The small gun went off with a pop, the bullet burying itself in the carpet. Colt slammed his fist into the judge's face, a crack of bone echoing in the room. Shoot him! The judge shrieked, blood pouring from his nose. The two guards were stunned for a second, the one holding Lila. Jeb raised his shotgun to aim at Colt. He never fired. Lila, her hands bound, threw her entire body weight against him. He stumbled, surprised, and in that instant, Colt, on the floor, drew his revolver. He fired. Once. The second guard, the one near the door, yelped and his shotgun blast went wide, blowing a hole in the ceiling. He clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers. Jeb, the man holding Lila, shoved her to the ground and leveled his shotgun at Colt's chest. No! Lila screamed. A deafening roar filled the room. Colt cried out, a sharp, animal sound of pure agony. The shotgun blast had caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, slamming him against the wall. His revolver clattered to the floor. Jeb swung the shotgun back to Lila, who was on her knees. The judge was on the floor, his nose broken, screaming in rage. The other guard was bleeding out by the door. It was over. They had lost. Lila looked at Colt. He was slumped against the wall, his face a mask of shock and pain, his left shoulder a ruin of blood. He was trying to reach for his gun, but his arm would not obey. She looked at Jeb, who was now advancing on her, his face a mask of rage. You little witch! He snarled. Lala's eyes darted around the room, the fireplace, the heavy iron poker. She moved like a snake. She scrambled the few feet to the hearth, grabbed the poker, and came up swinging. She did not aim. She just swung, with all her strength, all her terror, all her rage. The heavy iron caught Jeb square on the side of the head. There was a sickening thud. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a sack of grain. The shotgun falling beside him. Silence. The only sounds in the room were Colt's ragged, wet breathing, and the judge, who had gone quiet, staring in disbelief from the floor. Lila was standing, panting, the heavy poker in her hand. Her hands were still bound by the rope, which had been singed by the muzzle blast. She looked at the fallen guard, at Colt bleeding, at the judge. She had done that. She had saved them. She dropped the poker. She ran to Colt's fallen revolver, grabbing it. The metal was still warm. She turned and aimed it at the judge, her two hands trembling so badly she could barely hold it steady. Don't move, she said, her voice a reedy, unfamiliar sound. The judge, his fine suit covered in blood, slowly, carefully, got to his feet. He saw the gun in her hand. He saw the dead look in her eyes. He was no longer smug. He was afraid. Lila, my dear, he said, trying for a smooth tone. Put the gun down. You're in shock. Let us talk. Colt, Lila said, not taking her eyes off the judge. Are you? I'm here, he gritted, his voice thin. He was trying to press his hand to his shoulder, but the blood was everywhere. Lila, the gun! I have it, she said. She walked toward the judge, the gun extended. Sit down, in that chair, at the desk. Now, Lila. Sit, she screamed, her voice breaking. The judge sat. He was a small, broken man now, his power gone. The confession. Colt panted from the floor. Lila, make him write it. Lila's eyes narrowed. She understood. Paper, she snapped at the judge. Pen, now. The judge, his eyes wide with terror, fumbled in the desk drawer. He pulled out a sheet of thick, cream-colored paper and a pen. Write, Lila commanded. What? What do you want me to— Write what you did, she cried, her voice shaking. To Clara, the servant girl, write how you disciplined her, and write about Tennessee, write about Coulter Evans, how you covered up the murder, how you blackmailed him, write it all. That's preposterous, the judge blustered, his courage returning slightly. No one will believe. Lila pulled back the hammer of the revolver. The click-click was the loudest sound in the world. I don't care if they believe it, she said, her voice a cold, dead whisper. Write it, or I will shoot you. I will shoot you, and I will not feel a single thing. The judge looked into her eyes. He saw the truth. He saw the broken girl from the prairie, and he saw the woman who had just felled a man with a poker. He took the pen. His hand was shaking. What do I say? Write, I, Royston Harlan. She dictated. He wrote. He wrote about Clara. He wrote about the officer in Tennessee, and how Harlan had shot him in a drunken dispute, and how the scout, Coulter Evans, had taken the blame in exchange for his silence. He wrote it all, his elegant script sloppy with fear. When he was done, he threw the pen down. There, are you satisfied? Lila took the paper, her eyes scanning it. Sign it. He signed it. She had it. The truth. A piece of paper that could free them both. She turned to Colt. He was using the wall to pull himself up. He was pale, sweating, his left arm hanging useless. But he was on his feet. He looked at the judge with an expression of pure, unfiltered hatred. Good, Colt said, his voice a rasp. He held out his good hand. Give me the gun. Lila. Lila looked at him. She looked at the judge. She saw what was in Colt's eyes. It was not justice. It was revenge. No, Colt, she said softly. Give me the gun. He repeated, his voice low, urgent. He's a murderer. He's a monster. He deserves to die. He's taken everything from me, my name, my life. I know, she said, her own tears starting to fall. I know, but if you do this, you become him. He won't stop. Lila? Colt pleaded, taking a staggering step toward her. As long as he's alive, he will hunt us. He will never stop. This is the only way. He was right. She knew he was right. The judge was a cancer. You cut it out. Colt reached for the gun. Lila held it. He was going to kill him. He was going to murder this man in cold blood. Colt, please, she begged, her voice breaking. Look at me. Look at what he's made you. This is what he wants. He wants to take everything. She was crying openly now, holding the confession in one hand and the gun in the other. Don't let him take the good in you, too. Colt stopped. He stared at her tear-streaked face. He saw her, the woman who had nursed him, the woman who had danced with him, the woman who knew what she wanted, and she did not want to kill her. His face contorted, a mask of rage and grief and a terrible, tearing loss. He let out a sound, a strangled sob of pure agony, and he turned and slammed his good fist into the wall. He's right, the judge said, his voice a hopeful quaver. Lila, listen to him. This is your chance. We can start over. Lila turned and fired the gun. The bullet exploded the inkwell on the desk, showering the judge in black ink. He screamed, falling back in his chair. The next one is for you, Lila said, her voice dead. Get up, Colt. We're leaving. She grabbed his good arm, pulling it over her shoulder. He was a dead weight, barely conscious. Where? Untine, he muttered. Bess told you, Lila said, dragging him. Cellar, alley. She always has a plan. She remembered the layout of the house, the kitchen, the cellar door. Side door, she grunted, her knees buckling under his weight. "There's a door through the kitchen." She dragged him, one agonizing step at a time, out of the parlor, leaving the judge covered in ink, the two guards unconscious or dead, and the confession a stain on the rich carpet. She kicked open the side door. The sun was setting. The world was red. She hauled Colt to Bess's horses, which they had left hidden in a nearby thicket. She somehow, with a strength she did not know she possessed, got him into the saddle. She mounted her own horse, the gun still in her hand, the confession tucked safely in her dress. She took the reins of his horse. "Hold on, Colt," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, just hold on." He was slumped over the saddle, barely conscious. She kicked her horse, and they rode, a two-person caravan of blood and hope, into the long, dark, unforgiving night. The night was a blur of blood and motion. Lila rode with Colt's reins in one hand, the heavy revolver still in the other, and a single, desperate prayer in her heart. He was a dead weight in the saddle, slumped forward, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle that terrified her. The shotgun blast had torn his shoulder into a ruin of flesh and cloth, and the bleeding was dark and constant. She did not know where she was going. She was just riding, away, north, into the same hills they had fled before. But this time, she was not the one being saved. She rode until her own horse was stumbling with exhaustion, until the moon was high and the world was a wash of silver and black. Colt had not moved. He had not made a sound for over an hour. "Colt," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Hold on, please, Colt, just hold on." He did not answer. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. He was dying. He was dying in the saddle, and she was lost in the hills. She looked around, her eyes straining in the dark, searching for anything, a light, a shelter, and then she saw it, high on the ridge, silhouetted against the stars, was a simple, stark cross. She remembered it from her childhood, a story her mother had told her. An old Spanish mission built 100 years before, where nuns lived in quiet contemplation, tending a small vineyard and offering shelter to travelers. The mission of San Juan. She kicked her horse, pulling Colts behind her, and aimed for the cross. It was a steep, agonizing climb. Twice, Colt's horse stumbled, and he nearly fell, a low, unconscious groan tearing from his lips. Lila, her arms aching, her body screaming with fatigue, somehow kept him upright. She reached the mission gates, a high wall of crumbling adobe, and threw herself from the saddle. She beat on the thick wooden door, her bound hands clumsy and raw. "Please," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Help me, please! He's dying! Help me!" A small window in the door slid open. A woman's face, framed by a wimple, peered out. She was older, her face a map of deep, kind wrinkles. "We are closed, child," the woman said, her voice soft. "Please," Lila begged, tears streaming down her face. "He's been shot. He's my husband. Please, sister, he's dying." The nun's eyes went from Lila's terrified face to the man slumped over the horse, to the dark, spreading stain of blood. The window slammed shut. Lila's heart stopped. She thought they had been abandoned, but a moment later, she heard the heavy wooden bar being lifted. The gate swung open. "Bring him in," the nun said, her voice now crisp and full of authority. "Quickly, Sister Agnes, fetch the carbolic and water, a great deal of water." They half carried, half dragged Colt from the horse. Two other nuns, one old, one young, appeared and took his weight. They carried him into a small, whitewashed room. It was an infirmary, clean and stark, with a single narrow bed. It smelled of lies and dried herbs. Lila stumbled after them, her knees buckling. The older nun, the one who had opened the gate, turned to Lila. She looked at the rope on Lila's wrists, then at the gun Lila still held, forgotten, in her hand. She did not ask a question. She simply, gently, took the revolver from Lila's grasp. Then, with a small, sharp knife, She cut the ropes from her wrists. "My name is Sister Mary," she said, her voice kind. "You are safe here. Child, now. Tell me what happened to him." "Shotgun," Lila whispered, her body shaking so hard she could barely stand. "In the shoulder, hours ago." "Sister Agnes," Sister Mary commanded. "Take this child, give her water, and then we will work." For days, the world shrank to the four walls of that small, white room. Colt was lost in a fever. The wound, as Sister Agnes cleaned it, was worse than Lila had imagined. It was a deep, ragged crater, filled with torn cloth and lead pellets. The sisters worked with a practiced, grim efficiency, cleaning the wound, stitching what they could, and binding it tight. But the infection set in. The fever took him. He thrashed. He cried out. Not her name, but other names. "Elias!" he shouted, his voice a raw agony. "Hold the line! They're coming!" He was back in the war, his body burning, his mind trapped in a nightmare she could not enter. Lila refused to leave. She sat in a small wooden chair beside his bed, a pale, silent ghost. She slept there. She ate the simple broth the nuns brought her, but only when they insisted. For 2 days, she did not speak. She just watched, her hands clenched, as the man who had saved her life slipped away from her. "You must rest, child," Sister Mary said, putting a hand on her shoulder on the 3rd night. "You will do him no good if you collapse." "I can't," Lila whispered, her eyes fixed on his face, which was slick with sweat, his breathing shallow. "I can't." On the 4th day, the fever was at its worst. Sister Agnes shook her head, her face grim. "It is in God's hands now," she said softly. "The flesh is weak." Lila would not accept it. When the nun left, she pulled her chair closer. She took his hand. It was limp and burning hot. "Colt," she whispered, her voice raw. "You can't. Do you hear me? You cannot leave me. I am not done running. Not without you." She leaned closer, her lips near his ear, as if she could force her words into his unconscious mind. "I need you to come back," she pleaded. "You have to fight. You didn't let that man kill you. Don't let this... Come back to me." She began to talk. She talked for hours. She told him about her childhood, about the books her mother read her. She told him about the dreams she had, of a small schoolhouse and the sound of children reading. She told him about the cabin. "It's in a valley," she whispered, her voice growing stronger, as if she were building it with her words. "A quiet one, with tall trees and a stream. We'll build it together. You'll teach me how to use a saw. I'll plant a garden." She held his hand, her tears falling onto his arm. "You just have to come back. Colt, you just have to wake up. I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere." She talked until her throat was dry, until the sun set and the room was filled with the soft glow of a single candle. She finally fell asleep, her head resting on the bed, her hand still clutching his. She woke to a sound, a soft, scratching sound. She lifted her head, her neck stiff. The candle was almost gone. The room was in the gray, pre-dawn light. Colt's eyes were open. He was staring at her. The fever was gone. His eyes were clear, pale gray, and full of a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Lila's breath caught. She could not speak. He tried to say something. His lips were cracked. His voice was a dry, broken whisper. "Lila, I'm here," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm right here. I heard you," he whispered. His good hand, the right one, came up, his fingers brushing her cheek. It was dark, a long way down, but I heard your voice. He swallowed, the effort immense. "You were talking about a cabin. You were pulling me back. Your voice, I just followed it." Lila broke down, burying her face in the blankets, her sobs of relief shaking her whole body. He was back. He was back. His hand rested on her hair. "You're mine," he whispered, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "You always were." He recovered slowly. The man's constitution, built by years of hard living, fought off the last of the infection. The sisters fed him broth, then stew. Lila fed him, holding the spoon to his lips, an act of such simple intimacy it made her hands shake. He never took his eyes off her. A week later, he was sitting up. 2 weeks later, he was standing, his left arm in a sling, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes clear. He stood for the first time, his weight on her, and he did not let go. He just held her, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in. A month after they had arrived, a rider came to the mission. Lila was outside, hanging laundry for the sisters, her hands red from the lye. She saw the dust cloud first, then the familiar, steady rider. It was Bess. She dismounted, her face as impassive as ever, but her eyes, when she saw Lila, were soft. "He alive, then?" she asked, her voice gravelly. "He's alive," Lila said, her heart leaping. Bess nodded, pulling a bag from her saddle. "Good, because you two made a hell of a mess." They sat in the small mission courtyard, Bess sipping the sisters' rough red wine. Colt was there, sitting on a bench, pale but steady. "The judge is dead," Bess said, not bothering with pleasantries. Lila and Colt looked at each other. A strange, cold shiver went through Lila. "How?" Colt asked, his voice still rough. "Poison," Bess said, taking a drink. "Found him in his study, slumped over his desk. Ink everywhere. Glass of whiskey beside him, laced with arsenic. Suicide," Lila whispered. Bess shrugged. "That's the official story. The confession you made him write. It was found on the floor. The new marshal, a decent man, saw it. He rode out to the ranch and found Harlan dead. He put 2 and 2 together. Suicide, from the shame of his crimes being brought to light. But it wasn't suicide," Colt said. "It was not a question." "No," Bess said. "It wasn't. The talk in town is that the night he died, someone saw a small figure, a woman, leaving the ranch through the fields. Someone who knew the house, knew his habits." "Clara," Lila breathed, her hand going to her mouth. "No one knows for sure," Bess said, holding up her hand. "But that little maid, she had family, and they were grateful for the confession, for the truth." Bess looked at Colt. "The marshal, he read that confession. He read the part about Tennessee. He sent a telegraph to the army with the judge's own confession. The charges against Coulter Evans have been dropped. Officially, you're a free man. Colt, your name is your own again." Colt just sat there, staring at his hands. Free. It was a word he had not understood for 20 years. He looked up, and his eyes found Lila's. She was the one who had freed him. They left the mission a week later. They rode Bess's horses, which she had left for them, along with a mule and a wagon full of supplies. They said goodbye to Sister Mary, who pressed a small wooden cross into Lila's hand. "He is a good man, child," the nun said, "and you are a strong woman. God has given you a second life. Do not waste it." They did not go back to the prairie. They did not go to a city. They rode for 3 days into a high, quiet valley that Colt knew. It was sheltered from the wind, with a stream that ran clean and cold, and a stand of tall, straight pines. "This," he said, reining in his horse, "this is the place." They began to build. It was slow. His arm was still healing, and he could only work with one hand. But Lila was tireless. He taught her how to notch the logs, how to mix the daubing. She learned to swing an axe, her small frame surprisingly strong. Bess came, a month later, with a wagon. It was full of windows, a real stove, and more tools, and she was not alone. "Neighbors," she grunted. 2 other wagons were with her, driven by ranchers Lila had never met. They brought milled lumber for the floor, sacks of flour, and 2 chickens. "We heard what you did to the judge," one of the men said, a tough old man with a kind smile. "Anyone who had the grit to face that devil, well, they're welcome in this valley." They built the cabin in a week. A real home, small, sturdy, and safe. The first night in the cabin, The wind howled outside, but the fire in the new stove was bright and warm. The room smelled of fresh sawn pine and the stew Lila had made. They sat on the floor, on a blanket before the fire, their plates empty. Colt had been quiet all evening. He was watching her, his face full of an emotion she could not quite name. It looked like fear. "Lila," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm here." He turned to face her. He got to his knees, his hands, rough and calloused, one of them scarred from the burn of the shotgun blast, were trembling. I'm not a good man, Lila," he said, his voice thick. I've lived in the dark for a long time." "You are a good man, Colt," she said, her voice fierce. "You're the best man I've ever known." I want—" He stopped. He was shaking. This was harder than facing down the judge. "That night, in the shack, I told you that you didn't know what you wanted. I was wrong. It was me. I didn't know." He took her hand. "Lila, you're free. The judge is gone. You're not his. You're not your father's. You don't belong to anyone but yourself. And you can go anywhere. You can still be a teacher. You can go east." "I know," she said, her heart aching. "What are you saying, Colt?" "I'm saying," he said, his voice breaking, "that you have a choice, and if you want to choose me, if you'd be willing to stay," with a broke-down, one-armed cowboy. He took a deep, ragged breath. I'd be proud to call you my wife." Lila stared at him. This strong, silent, brave man. He was kneeling. He was asking. He was offering her a choice, the one thing no one else ever had. She didn't answer. She just moved. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him close, and kissed him. She kissed him with all the fear and the hope and the love that had been building for months. "Lila?" he whispered, his arms, one good, one weak, wrapping around her. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his, her tears wetting his cheeks. "You're the only man," she whispered. "Whoever asked?" The next evening, they sat on the small porch of their new home. The cabin was finished. The valley was quiet, the air sharp with the scent of pine. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in streaks of deep purple and fiery orange. Colt sat on the step, and Lila sat beside him, leaning her head on his good shoulder. His arm was wrapped around her. They held hands, their fingers laced together. They did not speak. They did not need to. They watched the last sliver of the sun disappear behind the high, dark mountains. They were safe. They were free. And they were, finally, and deeply, in love. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to hear from you. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and share your thoughts with us in English.